Welcome to the lecture 29 of the lecture series Psychology of Well-being. Well, today we are going to talk about struggles for well-being for people who have been through religious conflicts, and we'll be drawing some insights from the context of post-Godhra rights, and we'll try to understand the sources of challenges or the struggles for well-being that survivors could face during such difficult times as religious conflicts, thereby also understanding some implications for preventing such challenges or also providing some resources for facilitating their well-being, the survivors' well-being. So, what are the important lessons that we are going to learn here? Well, we are going to recapitulate the use of concepts of suffering and healing in the context of violence, as these are related to either threats to well being, challenges, or struggles for well being, and then healing focuses on attaining or the attempts to regain a sense of well being. Well, then we'll be moving on to the context of post Gothra rights, and with the help of the study by Vishwambaran and Priya, published in Cultural Medicine and Psychiatry, we'll be looking at the survivors' experiences of suffering among the within the post Godhra riots context. We'll also be looking at the implications of the findings of the study for moving towards making some attempts to have an experience of well being or rehabilitation for the survivors. Well, political violence and the potential threat to well being and mental health, we have already understood how important it is to try and focus on such potential threat to well being amongst people affected by such violence. Well, as Pedersen pointed out in 2008, that when assessing the overall mental health impact of exposure to protected forms of extreme violence in civilian populations, and religious violence could be one such example. So, Pedersen and the colleague argued for the need to move beyond the limited notion of post traumatic stress disorder, which is a diagnostic category indicating relative lack of mental health or well being. So, post traumatic stress disorder, which is a useful but restrictive medical category, failing to encompass the myriad of signals of distress, suffering, and affliction, as well as other culture bound trauma related disorders and long term sequelae of traumatic experiences. So, it becomes very critical that we try to understand the impact of such extreme violence on people with an open mind that would bring us closer to the distress, suffering, and affliction or other culture bound syndromes that people may have to go through. Well, what's the relevance of studying suffering and healing as processes or experiences of the survivors? Well, it helps us understand that what people can suffer from what they have lost of themselves in relation to the world of objects, events, and relationships. So that's where suffering tends to focus on the survivors' experiences of what they have lost of themselves to the world of objects, events, and relationships. Well, most generally, then, suffering can be defined as the state of severe distress associated with events that threaten the intactness or coherence of the person. And in general, in medical education, medical profession, suffering may not be a concern. However, it may be a concern among the patients and general public. So, it becomes important that the patients, survivors, general publics, orientation or priorities for letting their voice of distress or suffering being heard by people in general. That again is something which is important, and the concept of suffering as defined by Gassel and other social scientists like Kleinman becomes very, very important. Well, again, healing, as we had seen earlier, as Kleinman posits, empathic witnessing of or existential commitment to be with someone who is suffering may facilitate his or her building of an illness narrative that will make sense of and give value to his or her experiences. So it becomes important that with the help of the commitment from others to listen to what we have been through, that help us make sense of and give value to our experiences as a survivor through the stories or narratives that we can come up with, we can tell the people about about based on our own experiences of distress. This process of narrative restructuring of self is mediated by, as we saw earlier, the cultural beliefs and values, because a person who is suffering falls back upon these to restructure one's self or give it a new enabling meaning. And that's known as remoralization or healing. So, healing again can be seen as an important pointer towards efforts or towards an orientation where a person might be able to gain or regain a sense of well being. Well, let's look at the internally displaced survivors of post Godhra riots. Well, on February 27, 2002, one compartment in an Ahmedabad bound train was set on fire allegedly by Muslim individuals, killing 21 men, 26 women, and 12 children. After a month of carnage, 2,000 Muslims had died, 2,500 more were reported to be missing, lakhs of individuals were displaced, and property worth crores of rupees had been destroyed. Well, the study by Viswambran and Priya focused on an analysis of a documentary produced by Rakesh Sharma titled Final Solution, based on post-Godhra riots in 2002 in India. The analysis involved constructionist grounded theory, procedures, with a focus on the documentary as a whole. The resulting categories of survivor suffering have been presented in the following slides. Well, the first aspect of survivor suffering is overwhelmed by the losses. In the natural, I beg your pardon, in the rural cultural settings of India, where one of the major goals of a mother's life is to nurture their children, women who lost their children in the riots experienced intense distress. A woman who saw her son and daughter killed in the riots narrated her feeling of meaninglessness besides sharing her helplessness over how her son tried to save her before he was killed. Well, relational disruption is another aspect of survivor suffering, where some survivors shared their sorrow and anger over the loss of relationships with the friends or other religions or of other religion. Beg your pardon. One Hindu girl child narrated about her Muslim friend. Her name is Hina. She used to be my friend earlier, but not anymore. We do not play together now. She does not even know that Ram Sevaks, the devotees of Lord Rama, killed the Godhra train incident, were killed. In another scene of the documentary, a Muslim kindergarten student shared his new criteria for friendship that he would be friends only with a Muslim. In an interaction with him, when the filmmaker revealed his religion to be Hinduism, the child appeared to be a bit shocked because he had become friendly with the filmmaker. But the child was also not ready to accept a friend to be Hindu. The child said, "No, you are a Muslim." Living forced identities, another aspect of the survivor's suffering. So, for the survivors, social or religious identity that defines one's selfhood became the reason for being a target of prejudice and social exclusion. Survivors' perceptions of being labeled as a problematic other reverberated in the views of Hindu priests and the right-wing Hindutva party leaders too. One such leader narrated, "Our Muslims are like our disease, our headache, our problem." Survivors shared their distress of being labeled as being a problematic, harmful, or hated other in the society in general. A man who lost his niece and nephew in the riots was deeply anguished amidst hatred for Muslims as he shared that nothing except his election identity card could help him claim that he is not a citizen of some other country. So he said, "I'm an Indian. I'll remain an Indian. See my card number. If I lose this, it'll be difficult to get another. My name is Indian, L.A. Khan, an Indian. This is my identity. If I lose this card, how will I give India the proof of my being an Indian? If I have this, I can at least say I am an Indian. I love India. India is my country and I love it." Important thing to note here is that if he loses that card, it would be difficult for him to assert his identity that he is an Indian. And how does he give the proof of being an Indian? Denial of justice and equity, another aspect of survivors' suffering. Some survivors shared their distress over a disparity in the access to resources or support in the face of the disaster. Besides the abrupt and untimely closing down of certain relief camps for them, the Muslim survivors also face the distressing conditions of direct or indirect hindrances in availing medical treatment for the injured family members. An ambulance driver at Ahmedabad talked about the survivors' distress of being denied an equitable medical support. And he said, "We did get calls to transport the injured to the hospital. On the way, we would be stopped frequently on suspicion merely because ambulance organizers were Muslims. At least 500 to 700 patients were taken there. There were many doctors with a bad attitude. Many won't even try to stop the bleeding, which is normally a primary thing to do as to prevent blood loss would facilitate the chance of survival. We find that many deaths were caused because of negligence from the part of the doctors." Well, what are the implications for well being and rehabilitation as far as the study of people's plight, people's experiences of suffering, and their attempts to gain well being is concerned, despite such distress? But as per Castle and Kleinman, suffering due to being forcibly assigned a hated social identity and due to a denial of right to equality and justice can be understood as a threat to the selfhood of the survivors, as one would like to have a personal space where he or she is not subjugated to an inferior identity, an inferior or disadvantageous position, and where one can utilize the ability to redress the injury by others and by the state. The community based rehabilitation needs to be complemented with addressing the new forms of hierarchies, which are religious identity based, that emerged in the aftermath of violence. That is something which is critical, that we keep talking about individual and community based therapy or rehabilitation, but it has to be complemented with addressing the new forms of hierarchies that we observed in this study from Viswambaran and Priya, and with that was based on religious identity, the atrocities that one faced, and that is characteristic of religious violence. Thank you very much.